Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. Does Lalgarh prove that the left-front government in Bengal is incompetent at handling insurgency? That's the key issue I shall discuss today with the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, A B Bardhan. Mr. Bardhan, let me start with a simple question. How do you respond to the view that Lalgarh wasn't taken by the Maoists, it was abandoned by your state government? That Lalgarh isn't a sign of Maoist strength, but the incompetence of your state government?
Incompetence, you see, is a very harsh word. But I must say an element of neglect, an element of not undertaking the actual work that should be done, you see, particularly in an area inhabited by tribal people. There is a need for paying special attention to the tribal people, development and all that.
So you accept that the government in Bengal, which is your own government, is guilty of neglect?
You see, they had undertaken the agrarian reforms. 75% of the tribal people are beneficiaries of that agrarian reform. But beyond that, you have to do something more.
And they didn't do it?
They neglected it, yes, I will say so. I will say so.
Were you advising them to do something more? Did they, in other words, fail to listen to your advice?
No, at that time there was no question of my giving advice. In fact, the government was being run as an one-party government, more or less.
So in other words, the arrogance of the CPM meant that they felt they didn't need the advice of their own allies?
I leave the words to you. I won't use these harsh words. After all, you see, we are working in the same government, and we would like to be at peace with each other. At the same time, advise each other.
You don't want to use the word arrogance, but nonetheless, you weren't consulted, and because you want to live at peace with each other, you didn't make an issue of it.
I'm not making an issue of it, because now we are all settled with it.
But the government is guilty of neglect.
It was, in a sense.
And that neglect is because the CPM thought it knew how to handle the situation and it didn't look to others for advice.
I don't know if we were capable of giving advice, but if they had consulted all the partners of the left front, I think they would have done better.
You weren't consulted at all?
No, I don't think we were consulted. That is one of the failings of the left front in West Bengal, if I may say so. But the amount of consultation that ought to be there is not there.
So when at your national executive in Calcutta fairly recently, you said that left leaders should shed their arrogance, you actually had leaders of the CPM in mind?
Including my leaders also. You see, some of my leaders also are in positions of authority. You know, in West Bengal, also in Kerala, there are governments, you see, lower down, the local bodies. Anybody who comes to power, you see, tends to become a bit arrogant.
So not only
bossism comes in.
So not only has the CPM failed to consult its allies, but also members of the allies who are in power in Bengal have failed to keep in touch with their own parties.
I think so. Failed to keep in touch with the people, with the masses.
So Lalgarh is actually a result of a government not just being neglectful, a government being arrogant and not listening to its own party, and worst of all, a government failing to listen to its own people.
I leave all those remarks to you. That is, of course, your assessments of the whole situation, but I do feel that when you neglect, particularly in the tribal areas, you alienate the tribal people. You alienate them. And across the border, you see, is Jharkhand. And the whole area is a forest area, from West Bengal to Jharkhand. And the Maoists can just walk in.
This is very important. Neglect by the government led to alienation of the tribals. You accept that?
There is anywhere else, not only the tribals.
Absolutely. But the government is responsible for alienating the tribals.
For not undertaking the real work of development that they should.
And thus alienating them.
Thus alienating them.
And that alienation, in a sense, pushed them into the hands of the Maoists who are just across the border in Jharkhand.
The Maoists found a fertile soil.
And the fertile soil was created by the neglect of the left front government.
It is true, it's true. You see, facts must be admitted. What is there?
So the left front government, in a sense, is responsible for creating a situation that the Maoists could exploit.
Yes. Having developed up to a certain level, by giving them land, which they own, 75% I said are beneficiaries, you have to move ahead.
And they didn't move ahead.
And they didn't move ahead.
And they should have moved ahead years and years ago.
Years and years ago. Because
in fact, decades ago.
30 years of rule.
So this is neglect that goes back not 1 or 2 years, but it goes back decades.
No, in the sense you say that particularly it has been aggravated during the last 10 years.
The last 10 years is a very long time.
Yes, it is a long time.
A government being neglectful of its own people for 10 years is a pretty difficult thing to imagine.
You see, things have added to it. I would say, for instance, the rise of the Trinamool Congress, the linking up of the Trinamool Congress with the Maoists, the mutual help which they were rendering to each other, united in their common hatred towards the left.
Except in a democracy, you expect your opponents to score points off your weaknesses, and if the Trinamool Congress scores point off your weakness, then it's your fault.
I agree. I admit that. I admit that.
So in fact, even the rise of the Trinamool Congress is a result of the failures of the left front government.
If the left front government, you see, was not failing in some respects, what scope would the Trinamool have? None. Mamata Banerjee or the Trinamool leadership can take advantage of only our weaknesses.
And she did.
She did.
And she was threatening to take advantage of your weaknesses for a couple of years, maybe 3-4 years. You had advance notice.
Yes, but I tell you, you must also see the unscrupulousness of the whole thing. That she is willing to join hands with the Maoists.
I accept
the Maoists are willing to help her.
I accept that. I won't quarrel with you about what you call her unscrupulousness. Others may, but I won't. Let's stick to the left front government. She was threatening to exploit your failures and your weakness for many years. Yet even so, you were unable to correct the weakness and correct the failures. In other words, even though you knew she was taking advantage of you, you let her take advantage.
Up to a certain point. For instance, in Lalgarh itself, they sealed themselves off, particularly after the incident of bomb blast. You see, when the convoy of the chief minister was going.
And even after that, the government did nothing.
Should have done.
So not only were you neglectful in terms of ignoring the development and creating alienation and therefore pushing the tribals into the hands of the Maoists, you were also neglectful in terms of pure security.
As I look back, you see, I do think that it could have been nipped in the bud if action had been taken 7 months before.
It could have been nipped in the bud 7 months before.
Yes.
So the security aspect was neglected for 7 whole months.
Security, whose security? You see, what happened was...
The security of the tribals who were being overtaken and dominated by the Maoists. They weren't necessarily willing
by the Maoists. And the police ran away from there.
Quite right.
The Lalgarh police station, you see, was under lock and key for about 6 or 7 months.
In fact, it's even worse. When the PCPA demanded that police posts be shut down, not once but on 2 separate occasions, the left front government complied, and complied with the deadlines given by the PCPA, which is why I say the Maoists didn't take over, you abandoned it.
In a sense, I must say, that is why I am today saying that it's not just a matter of police action. That is not the solution. Police action, perhaps, you see, could not be avoided at the present moment because they were taking recourse to all types of violence against political activists.
What is it then a question of?
It is a question of also going there and giving relief to the people.
But beyond
if for
that,
6 months that entire area is, you see, isolated, the administration is not there, health care is not there, food is not available, you have to go.
You've given me 2 very good explanations why Lalgarh happened. One, failure to push through with development for 10 years at a time, thus alienating the tribals, thus pushing them into the hands of the Maoists. And secondly, failure to take security action to nip in the bud the problem when it began as long ago as November, 7 months ago. On both counts, the government actually failed.
But are you interested in, you see, outlining all the failures of the government? That is not the issue.
No, I'm very interested in your ready acceptance of the failures. There's no defensiveness on your part.
I think there ought to be some self-criticism. We should understand, you see, it didn't drop from the skies. Why did it happen in Lalgarh?
Can I put something to you? Both the failures you've talked about, the development failure as well as the security failure, both of them at the end of the day reflect absence of political will. If you had the will, you'd have done the development. If you had the will, you'd have secured the place.
It is. You have come to a position now, you see, where you have to, you see, requisition help from the center in order to face the situation, which is ordinarily a situation that the police in West Bengal ought to have faced before.
I'll come to the police situation in a moment's time because I think there's a lot there that I want to explore with you. But when you agree with me that both the failures reflect a bigger failure in terms of political will, are we not actually saying that the leadership of the left front government, I won't name names, but the leadership of that government failed you?
What is the point, you see, in saying that? Are we out, you see, to pillory somebody just now?
I'm not pillorying
That is not the
anyone.
issue.
No, I don't want to pillory anyone. But by accepting that leadership failed, you're actually pinpointing where the failure was.
So therefore, a solution has to be found now.
With the leadership.
With the same leadership, you see, because you don't change a leadership, you see, when you have to face a situation.
Well, you may not change the leadership when you have to face a situation. You don't change a general in the middle of a war. But when you know that the general has brought the war on and fought it badly, then you do say to yourself, when the war's over, I think I need to change the general.
You see, I'm not in that position to change the general. That's another matter. But what
Because you're the junior partner.
I'm the junior partner, yes.
But were you to be in a position to give advice to the senior partner, would you advise a change of general?
No, I don't. It's up to them. But that is not the issue.
But up to them means, obviously it's up to them. It's their decision. They have a majority on their own. They can ignore you.
Yes, yes.
But if advice were to be given, would you advise that we need a change of general?
A change in the direction of work. I would say that. Whether A remains or B comes, you see, it doesn't make any difference. The party is there. Party is a collective team. Right or wrong, it does work.
I've heard two things from you. A change in the direction of work. That's the most important thing. Is that right?
Yes.
The second thing you said is whether A comes or B comes, whether A remains or B goes, is not a very important thing. That doesn't sound like a very passionate defense of the general in charge at the moment. Let him stay if he stays, let him go if he goes. That's your attitude.
You see, what I'm saying is that I'm not concerned with the general at the moment. I'm concerned with the people in Lalgarh at the moment.
But the problem is, if you can't change the general, you may not change the policies.
There is a police action going on. A police action in which the center also is participating. It is unfortunate. And it looks as if it is a war that is going on. A war against whom? Against our own people, against our own tribal brothers.
Which makes it even worse because you're a communist party that represents the people.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So this alienation from the people is something that has to be cured. Let us try and cure it.
Let me put it like this. It would be difficult for you to openly at this moment in this interview say that you want a change of general. Although you've indicated no great passionate support for the general. Let me put a different question to you. Do you think questions need to be asked of the general about the conduct of this whole business? Not just what's happened now in Lalgarh, but the build-up to it in terms of security, and then the bigger build-up to it in terms of neglect of development. Do you think questions need to be asked?
These questions will certainly have to be answered by the general, whatever it is.
And
after all, it's in the party. There has to be a post-mortem, and not only a post-mortem, there has to be a cure. Supposing even the police action is successful in driving the Maoists out, then what?
So
how do you ensure that they don't come back?
There has to be
how do you ensure that you have won over the people?
So there has to be a post-mortem.
There has to be not only a post-mortem, there has to be steps to be taken. Say for instance, you see just now, let me explain. There is an action going on. One has to see that you don't further alienate the people, because it should not be as if it's a military offensive.
I understand.
It should be a sort of a very patient, steady
winning back of people.
Winning back the people.
You said a moment ago that not only do steps have to be taken, you said there has to be a cure. The post-mortem has to lead to a cure.
Yes.
Can you today completely rule out that the cure won't include a change of general?
I'm not interested in the change of general, nor can I bring it about, nor am I interested in it. And I don't think that that will be a solution of the whole problem. As I said, the policy, now for instance, for 7 months you see they have not been getting medical help. Hospitals have not been working. For 7 months you see no education is going on. For quite a few months you see no food is going there.
All of this has to be
All of this has to be done.
So
therefore I am saying, for every inch that the police is advancing, all the people there you see must get all the relief.
Let me end this part by putting one simple question. You're talking about a very thorough post-mortem, not just a whitewash.
No. Whitewash won't do, because more Lalgarhs may come about.
And the CPI will ask questions at that post-mortem. You may not
Why
be
should you not? We are partners. We have a right to ask questions.
And your voice will be therefore heard loud and clear.
It is being heard. That is why very recently a meeting of the core committee of the cabinet has been called, and the CPI has a very senior person there in that core committee.
Who asked questions?
Who will ask questions. That will be taking place.
So when it comes to the post-mortem and when it comes to asking questions, the CPI won't behave like a junior partner, you'll be fearless.
It doesn't, you see, because there in the core committee, he's not a junior man.
Let's take a break at that point. I want to come back, and in the limited time available, I want to talk about something you mentioned only briefly. That is the manner in which the police have been neglected in Bengal, as a result of which today, when you have a crisis, you may not have the police to tackle the crisis for you. We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, A B Bardhan. Mr. Bardhan, let's pick up on a point you made in point one about the way in which the police force in Bengal has been neglected and not developed, as a result of which today, when you have an insurgency, you simply don't have the capacity to fight it. Can you accept that progressively over the decades, and you've been in power for over 30, the left front government has not done enough to boost and build and create an effective police force?
That is so all over the country in the first place. In the second place, you see, the whole administration has not been relying on the police in order to carry out its duties. It's not a police state. In fact, in West Bengal, the number of police per 1 lakh population is the least.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm so glad you've picked that up. The police per population ratio of Bengal is 92 compared to a national ratio of 125.
Yeah, fine.
What's even worse is that in the last 8 years, it's diminished by a further 10%. It used to be 100 per 1 lakh. It's now just 92 per 1 lakh.
You're right, you're right.
How then, when you face with an insurgency, can you tackle it? You just don't have the police force.
I think that should be looked into.
It should be looked into.
It's not only a question of the personnel, it's also a question of the equipment that they have.
Well, on the equipment first, are you aware of the fact that CAG reports show that between the years 2000 and 2005, at least on 2 occasions, 90% of the funds given by the Centre for Modernization were unspent by your government?
This detail I don't know, but if it is so, it is bad.
And these are CAG facts I'm quoting to you.
Yes, it might be.
On the personnel front, are you aware that you have a 28% deficiency of personnel in the civil police, a 17% deficiency of personnel in the armed police, and in the important leadership ranks of the armed police, your deficiency is an astonishing 35 or 37%.
You are right. As I said, you see, West Bengal, the ratio of the police compared to the population is the least. And yet, Mamata Banerjee and the Maoists and all others go on talking about police state, police atrocities,
Far
and
from a
so
police
forth.
state, you don't have a competent police force. It's undermanned, under-equipped, probably under-morale.
I don't know about the morale, but I do think it is undermanned.
And this is neglect by the government, isn't it?
It should be. The police force must be built up. You see, because any administration, whether a communist one or anybody else, must have the police force also. It's one of the functions of the state.
So once again, the generals in charge need to be asked questions.
Oh, you forget about the general. I am talking about the state.
Here is a case where the state is withering away in the wrong sense of the term, isn't it?
Don't have to use that phrase.
Well, but it is true, isn't it? Let me point something else out to you. Naxalism, as you know better than I, began in Bengal in 67.
Yes.
Your party and your allies have been in power from 77.
Yes.
And you even today don't have a police force that is trained for counterinsurgency.
But look here, Naxalism is not the issue there. Naxalism has been fought politically and I think successfully. This is really Maoism, and Maoism that has degenerated to the point of extortionism.
But you have no anti-insurgency force, no trained force to do it. Now you're rapidly sending people to Kanker, but it's a little bit too late.
It is too late.
It should have happened 10 years earlier.
Yes.
In contrast, there's Manik Sarkar in Agartala, a smaller state, a poorer state, facing a much more virulent insurgency.
Yeah, he's doing it well.
He's handled it decisively.
And they can decide, I must appreciate it. I do appreciate it.
In contrast, the West Bengal government looks pretty incompetent, doesn't it?
You see, it's not a question of the police only. The whole question is of the administration in general.
And that's lacking in Calcutta, but it isn't in Agartala.
It is there.
The will to fight is in Agartala. The will to fight was somehow missing in Calcutta.
As you put it.
You don't disagree?
It's not a question of my agreeing, it's a question of fact.
Mr. Bardhan, a pleasure speaking to you.